Hello, everybody. This is Nihar Chaya, and I want to welcome you to my LinkedIn live show, The Executive Experience. I am so excited to welcome my friend Laine Joelson Cohen, who is a director of learning at Citigroup and an executive coach and a speaker, and someone who I'm going to enjoy speaking with for the next half hour, and really happy to take your questions as well if you're tuning in. Before we get started, I wanted to encourage you all to let us know where you're chiming in from. Want to definitely take your questions and also your comments. And if you enjoy what you're hearing from Laine and myself, please feel free to hit the share button and the like button so more people from your network can join in. And Laine, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, so Laine is someone who I had a pleasure of meeting through the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches community, which Laine was actually one of the initial members of back when it first started several years ago. And also someone who I've had a chance to get to know because I have a lot of interest in how, I work a lot in the corporate space with executive coaching. And most of the leaders I work with are managing really complex teams. And even before the pandemic and the remote work from home arrangements that we've had to deal with, we're already dealing with, challenges on building trust and psychological safety and things like that. And Laine is an expert in coaching teams, and I really wanted to dig into some of her expertise in this area, and also open it up to the audience around questions that people might have in working remotely and some of the challenges that we're dealing with now. So Laine, if we might just start with, maybe you can share with us a little bit about your work at Citi, and also kind of what brought you into the learning and development space.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. So I'm part of a group called Leadership and Performance Solutions. And really our North Star is helping leaders, develop the skills that they need, have the resources that they need, and really overall support to do this very challenging thing, which is leading complex teams, as we talked about. I spent a lot of my career both in the business and doing sort of very technical type roles in HR. So I was leading compensation and equity compensation type stuff. But what really always drove me was being able to bring people together successfully to work across boundaries and to, drive towards a common goal. So a lot of what I did in my technical roles was to try to help people collaborate. And so, I found out it's probably about 9 or 10 years ago that there was this thing called learning in an organization like Citi and leadership development. And when I learned that by actually attending one of Citi's leadership development programs, I walked away with this complete aha moment that I needed to go be doing this. And that was really the beginning for me to move over into the learning profession.
And at Citi, what's it like in terms of getting people excited about learning? I think with any business that we work with, people are often focused so much on their day-to-day job. And I think, as you probably know in your role, if we're not keeping the company ahead of the curve in terms of learning and being ready for the changes that are coming, we're not going to be prepared and as competitive. But is it hard to get executives and managers and their teams to get excited about some of these learning opportunities? And how do you get them kind of bought into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it certainly is a big challenge. I mean, the number one barrier that we hear all the time, whether it's at Citi or anything, I do externally where I talk to people, it's about that idea of not having enough time. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of that is actually a mindset shift. And what I mean by that is when you think about learning, you automatically, if I ask that question, you're answering it in terms of going to like a program or taking a chunk of time out to learn. Mm-hmm. And so that's where that barrier comes in. But truthfully, when you think about how we actually learn at work, much of the way that we learn is integrated in our daily work that we do. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing a stretch assignment or you're, meeting with a colleague who does something else in your organization or what have you, you are learning. Yeah. we sort of forget to label that. So there's this idea that it only happens in a classroom of some sort. It
reminds me of like the 70-20-10 model where I guess, right, you want more experiential on the job type of learning going on.
Exactly. And I always do ask people, I say, think about a time when you learned something really important that like was pivotal in your career. And, tell me what it is. And inevitably people talk about those things that I mentioned that happen experientially.
Hmm.
Very rarely, maybe it is that 10%, is that I went to this amazing, leadership development program and there it was. That's not to say they don't have their place, they do, but learning happens all the time. And so I think by sort of acknowledging that and then coupling that when you want to learn a specific skill with education is important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, a lot of times when I'm coaching leaders, they'll say, well, can you just send me a class or send me a book and those things they have their space, their role. But I think the idea of actually taking maybe even one page of that book and saying, I'm going to go and apply it on the job tomorrow, as opposed to just kind of the crutch that we all feel of just getting lots more certifications and lots more degrees and stuff. It's not as valuable usually.
Yeah, but I think intellectually it's easier,
Hmm.
right? Like to think about how else might I learn this, or what am I really trying to learn? Like, oh, I have to do something better with communication. Let me go take a communication class. But like, what exactly are you trying to get at relative to communication? Sort of like peeling it back. That takes time and thought,
Yes.
right? So it's in a sense much easier to just say, okay, I'm going to go do this. But I think if you looked at the end of the spectrum there, you probably didn't take as much away, and if you're not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Citi is such a massive organization. How do you scale these kinds of efforts that you guys are working on, and particularly now and that's why I want to segue also working remotely. Do you find that maybe it's easier because you can use technology now, to a greater degree, or is it harder? What's it been like to scale all your efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. It's certainly easier from a time perspective to be virtual. And I think what we've really found, as we all have with so many things, that this idea of doing things on video and Zoom and virtually isn't so bad, right? Like I think there was, we kind of got forced into it a little more, and now we're really seeing the benefits.
Yeah.
And I think from a scalability perspective, one of the things that, Citi is such a global organization with so many different businesses. You want to do things where you're getting the content and the concepts, et cetera, that are common across, because much of what we do is the same no matter where you sit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely things that are different depending on where you sit. And so the magic, I think, is getting that balance between not reinventing the wheel 80 times, but actually having a good foundation that then can be, nuanced for the business that you're in or the country in which you sit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we really try to do to scale.
Yeah. And you do quite a bit of coaching, and I understand, and that's kind of where you enjoy doing that work as well.
I do, and so I do that with teams, with individuals, and I'm able to do that. It's not my full-time job, but I'm able to do that a bit at Citi and volunteer my time externally as well.
What would you say are some of the most interesting challenges that you've helped teams with, with coaching, et cetera?
Yeah. What I see with teams is that a lot of times very simple things, when unaddressed, become really complicated, dysfunctional situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of what I do with teams is give them a safe place and a way to voice all of those things that they've never talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I always suggest, in a perfect world, that when you have a new team, you take that time to kind of bounce the ball down really hard at the beginning, so that you can work together in a much better way moving forward. And so those are things like, norms and routines, and how do we like to communicate, and what do we do when we have conflict? But often that doesn't happen. And so some of those inferences and assumptions get really dug in. So again, I like to bring people together to have a safe place to voice what they're struggling with and come up with a way to communicate moving forward and sort of press the reset button and move forward as a really cohesive team.
When you're dealing with leaders at, let's say, an executive level, and their team maybe is, I don't know, 6 to 10 on a leadership team, how do you then make sure that they're cascading it down levels? Because I imagine it's not productive to have like 15 people, or maybe is it? I mean, is there like an optimal amount of people to have that kind of safe discussion, and then maybe have them create activities for their own teams afterwards?
Yeah, so I would probably answer this in two ways. So if I'm dealing with a particular team who's addressing an issue, I'm really trying to get to the core team at which the issue is sort of stemming from. So maybe it's the leadership team, but to your point, the impact of that likely has infiltrated down the ranks of that particular organization. And so I think until you're getting the source of some of that conflict resolved, the rest of it, won't work. And I've seen it the opposite, where I have somebody who I'm working with, and when we talk about what they're struggling with, it's really coming from the top, and they're trying to influence up, and it's an uphill battle. So I do think going to the root cause is really important. The second part of what you were asking is if we're looking at a broader initiative or something that we're trying to cascade in the organization. Again, I think you can really do both. So working with leadership teams who are sort of setting the tone and able to, model whatever it is that they're trying to infuse in the rest of the organization is important. But we've got so many incredible leaders across the organization. You don't need to have a title. You don't need to have a role in the hierarchy, who are making change and innovating every day in different ways. And so I think giving voice to those folks as well to do that in whatever seat they're in is very effective.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I want to ask you about what do you do when you're a new leader and with an inherited team? So, maybe you're promoted into a new role, or maybe you even came in from the outside, and there's all these old tapes or, something going on with that. In fact, maybe even the leader doesn't even know what all that stuff is going on. But what do you suggest to that leader? Like, should they try to get really deeply into understanding those things, or maybe even say, you know what, I want to let those dynamics be where they were in the past, and let's try to start fresh? Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, really. I think the leader coming in needs to understand the landscape and the historical dynamic, because as we were talking about before, it could be really infused and dug in that organization. And I think just pretending like to ignore it isn't going to make it go away. But by the same token, you can signal it's a new day and I'm a new leader, and as a result, we're a new team. And so really having those conversations at the beginning about, what do I expect? What's really important to you? What do you need from me to feel like you can be successful? If I, as your leader, come with, what are like 3 key things that I should start doing right away, to really ask for that input. So I always suggest with new leaders that they kind of do a listening tour, both with their team, with stakeholders, just to understand. And you'll get a pretty clear sense if you're actually listening. You'll get a pretty clear sense right away of what's what, and kind of know where you need to focus to change the landscape.
Yeah, because particularly if you're a leader that comes in and maybe somebody on your team really wanted your job, or was vying for it, or, there's just lots of different human dynamics that I think go on. And, I like the idea of actually starting with the listening and starting with getting to know what those issues are in a safe way. Now, one thing I'm fascinated by is the idea of a team working together versus like individually developing them. Do you have a philosophy or even your experiences in, like, if I'm coaching a leader, to, portray the best behaviors of leadership effectiveness, and I'm asking him to coach his team. How much does it work to just work with them on one-on-ones versus getting everybody together and always having to have some kind of group intervention so people are aware of where they might be, freeloading or kind of, holding the boat back and things like that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the leader and how much that leader has, one, how self-aware they are.
Mm-hmm.
And you're making an assessment on that, of course, if you're just talking to the leader, right? Everybody thinks they're very self-aware, right?
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, so how self-aware is that leader? How much is that leader already, creating opportunities for their team to surface issues, to, bring up the ideas, to lead, transformation, whatever it is. If that leader has a pretty good sense of that, then you're really able to, I think, guide them to continue those conversations. And what I would suggest is that you're getting feedback, very specific feedback of how those conversations are going, so you can help that leader, course correct or build upon the successes that they're having.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have somebody who's not done any of that, I think working only with the leader can almost be, you're taking them out and then you're putting them into the same ecosystem that they're already sort of struggling in. And it's a pretty heavy lift to move the whole team and culture along with them. And so in those situations, I think there's benefit to working with the leader and the team.
Mm-hmm.
So one very simple example when you have a new leader with a team is something called a new leader assimilation or a new manager assimilation. That's out there in the ecosystem. You can Google it and get that information. And the intention of that is to set some of those norms that I talked about earlier about how a team interacts. How do they communicate? What's important to them? What do they want to know about the leader that they don't know? What do they want the leader to know about them? And so doing that gives them an opportunity, a facilitated way to have some of those conversations, and then the leader can kind of take it from there.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I used to do leader assimilations a lot when I was internal. And but I also found that like leaders would get so caught up in trying to start their first 90 days, and the leader assimilation was almost like a forgotten thought. Like, well, we'll just, I'll get to know them as I'm getting to know them. But I think that facilitated activity is so important because people, particularly if you have a new boss, it's not really, I suppose, the most comfortable thing to go to your new boss and say, hey, I want to really hash out these things. You're hoping to have some kind of a safe place. So I think it's a great idea to actually say, that's got to be part of your 90 days or your first 90 days, right? To really create that safe environment. Now, as far as building trust and safety across teams, I know that a lot of companies I worked with will, they'll do things like happy hours, and they'll do like, hour-bound courses or whatever, any kind of things that'll create those kinds of off-site experiences. Do those things really work? Are there things that we could be doing better to kind of initiate those trusted moments for team members?
Yeah, I mean, I think doing those types of activities that create a relationship and cohesion are great. They are. It's important to feel, in order to feel safe and comfortable, like your people and they know you and they know each other. So that definitely has a place.
Yeah.
Is it the only thing that we should be doing? No. There's so many different ways that we can create that environment of trust and psychological safety for our teams. And so I think, again, building the relationships are important. How you conduct your everyday meetings and work with your team is equally as important.
Yes.
Because if we say that we want to have trust and we want people to be able to bring ideas, we need to create the space for people to bring ideas. And when they're different from our ideas, and our as the leader, how we react will very quickly determine whether there's openness and trust on our team, right?
Right. So if there's like defensiveness, then it sends the message like, don't ever come to me with any of your problems.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks. Okay. So John, what do you think?
Right,
I mean, you can really, or I talk first. So let me tell you guys all, we're going to do this thing and let me tell you what all my really good ideas are. Anybody else have an idea? You're done.
That's a great point.
Right. And I think having those relationships from those team building activities, hopefully then people can either say, oh yeah, she always does it. Hey, Laine, be quiet, or they've got that. But all of those things together are important for sure.
Yeah. I did a recent article with Frances Fry, who's at Harvard Business School, and she talks about this idea that like, oftentimes we'll have a meeting and at the end of the meeting, we'll say, does anybody else have anything to say? But it's like, nobody's really focused on that, right? Everybody's ready to go. So it's like in the beginning, you got to start by saying, what are we not thinking about here? What else do we need to, how else do we need to frame this issue? So it's like, and I imagine, it takes more time. It takes more iterations. But at the same time, I suppose you make sure everybody's heard.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do, or to suggest even in meetings like that, we get very excited when we have agreement, right? We have this great idea and we go in and everybody's like, yes, 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 yes. And you're so tempted to just move on because you have all the yeses. And what the risk is at that point is that, one, people can be giving you sort of that nod, like, totally. Yeah, we'll do that. And then not really be on board and work on the side. Or you might not even have gotten to the best idea. You just got to one that people could agree upon. So at that moment, I love the question, who has a different perspective? What else might, or to what you said earlier, what are we missing? What else might be a workable solution? Getting that in and inviting, different thoughts is really critical to get to the best result. And again, back to the idea of trust and safety, lets people know that you really do want to hear things that are different than what's coming out of your own mouth.
Yeah. Have you found that it's significantly more challenging working remotely this year for those kinds of experiences?
I think it depends. And it depends on what the relationship was like before. And so we've had so many different situations where we've had leaders who have onboarded to new teams in the middle of a pandemic, virtually. And so building that trust and establishing that communication has been, it's really hard. I think for existing teams who really had that already, they're able to weather it. But I think there it's about remembering to check in more and to, make sure that you've got everybody in place. And in some ways, I will say it's created more of an even playing field. So I am in a team where we have some people sit together and some people sit in different places. And so often there was a feeling that the people who sat together, sort of like knew something that everyone else didn't know and all of that. And so having everybody now in the square box actually really even the playing field in a nice way.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It takes away the perception that there's a clique or there's a certain kind of crowd there. Yeah. Want to give a quick shout to my friend Celeste Somoza, who's just joined us. And she also likes what you said around giving people the space to manage the transition of having a new leader. And those of you that are joining, please feel free to type in any questions you have. We have a few more minutes here with Laine. And so, Laine, I wanted to also ask you about the idea of standing out while you're in a team as well. So, this kind of healthy tension between becoming an inclusive group, but also having enough differences that, I can feel like I'm able to look out for my career and that kind of idea. Like, I don't want to be too much of a bragger about myself, but at the same time, if I don't toot my own horn, who will, and things like that. How do you suggest doing that? Particularly, I want to touch on for women leaders, for underrepresented minorities, for instance. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so important, and it's something I think that a lot of people struggle with, and particularly when, if you're a team that's typically co-located and now you are virtual, this is even more important because you're kind of shutting off your camera and doing your thing, and nobody's with you.
Yeah.
So the first thing I think I would say is that being a great team member, a great team partner, and being a standout contributor are not mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So you really can do both. And some of the ways that you are that standout team member is by being that resource for your team and championing your colleagues. In that way, I think you can stand out tremendously. And then, when you do talk about your own contributions, which nobody better to do it than us individually.
Mm-hmm.
It's not without the context of you also talking about the great things that other people are doing.
Right.
Sort of balanced. So it's not all about me. It's about me and the team. And I'm one of the team, and I'm going to talk about my contributions as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've noticed, I would say this year, I probably had no less than 5 clients who were promoted in February.
Wow.
And so then March, all of a sudden they had to work from home. And so they're literally like having this big plan about how I'm going to be this amazing leader at this new level with this new team. And then it's like, I can't meet anybody. And I feel for them, even to this day, it's so much, it's, 9-10 months later, and they're still like, I don't know my team the way I really want to know them. And obviously structurally with work from home and remote stuff, it's not their fault, but I wonder if there are ways to replicate that. And I like what you said, checking in. I think, with respect to their team, but also even with new stakeholders that they're working with, maybe having more conversations to say, hey, let me get to know you and things like that. It's a little bit more self-driven, but I suppose that might be a good option.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, really understanding and asking what's important to whether it's your team or your stakeholders is a great place to start. Like, I'm new here, or I'm just trying to get to know you. What are the things that are most important to you? What's most important to you personally? What's most important to you in terms of your career? What's most important to you about the way we work together? And what do you need to feel really good? And from a stakeholder perspective, what are the key things that my team does for you? Or what are the key challenges that you have with my team? What would it look like if things were going really well between us and you were getting what you need? So that goes back to that listening tour, and the listening tour doesn't happen once, right?
Right.
It should be like a practice that we continue even when we've been enrolled for several years, because context changes.
Yeah.
Who's in the other seat changes.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And particularly for the leaders that I work with that are introverted, they might have struggled a little bit with the idea of getting out of their comfort zone and having those conversations. But what's interesting is that now that they're working remotely, they're able to just pick up the phone. Maybe it's a little more comfortable for them than having to go have a whole hour-long coffee with somebody or walk into somebody's office. So maybe there's some blessings in disguise from the work from home structure too.
Yeah, I have a lot of people who say to me, like, I feel so uncomfortable networking, and I feel so uncomfortable taking somebody's time because they see that type of networking thing as one-sided. And if you can think about it as reciprocal, and by asking questions, you're actually giving somebody an opportunity to think out loud and talk about their own successes. Sometimes it feels a little bit better.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I love just the general theme here is like, you're kind of giving something before you're expecting something in return.
Yeah.
You're listening before telling. Laine, I can't believe how fast a half hour went.
Oh my gosh, it did go fast.
And I know that you're such a busy executive, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But so first of all, I want to encourage everybody that's tuned in to follow Laine on LinkedIn if you haven't already. And follow me as well, so you can kind of be abreast of anything else that's going on with LinkedIn Live. And anything that you want to share, Laine, or anything that we should know about in terms of your work going forward?
Yeah, just really excited about helping leaders and teams really navigate this complex time that we're in. Like you said earlier, work is complex as it is, and so being able to really support leaders and teams through this particularly challenging time is something I'm really excited about.
Well, thank you so much, Laine. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure. And I hope in 2021 we'll have you back on as well, so we can continue the dialogue.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.